past weekend saw transnational CEOs, banking elites, foreign diplomats, and public servants once again convene for the annual Bilderberg conference. And with no surprise, the meetings, like in past years, were cloaked in complete secrecy. Yet this year saw increased scrutiny by independent journalists and media outlets who are now demanding transparency. So what did we learn from this year's summit? Now, to gain some insight, I was joined earlier by journalist and radio host Jason Bermas. I first asked Jason what kind of definitive policies have resulted from these secretive meetings. Check it out.
Well, for one, we know that the European Union and the Euro has come on by admissions from their own members, such as Edouard Davignon, who actually attended this year, and he is a Belgian finance minister. So we've already had pretty high-level admissions that this is more than just a think tank, more than just a consortium of people that are getting together talking. No, they're actually setting policy in there, Abby.
You followed Bilderberg for years. In fact, that we were both there covering it last year in Chantilly, Virginia. As we know, the Bilderberg Committee has taken a different approach to the media this year, providing a media contact and tent. What do you attribute this change in attitude to?
Well, I believe the only reason that they've changed their attitude slightly is because of the light that we have shined through the alternative media and programs like yours to make people aware that this group not only exists, but it does wield great power. Once again, when you have the heads of states, the heads of banking industries, the heads of Dutch Royal Shell, Facebook, Google, in attendance with prime ministers like Carl Cameron, obviously they are shaping the world around us.
And, you know, I fear, though, Jason, that this is just the guise of transparency. I mean, like we saw this year, the protesters had this fenced-off area far away from the conference hall, it looked like for the first time. Let's talk about the most interesting attendees that we know were there. Aside from multiple banking CEOs, head of the World Bank, IMF, there were also members of British Parliament, along with high-level CEOs of today's top tech companies, Google, Amazon. Jason, the Bilderberg website listed two interesting discussion points from this year, including very vaguely how big data is changing almost everything and cyber warfare. What do you think this all means? Put this all together for us.
Well, right now we have a huge scandal breaking out that's old news to people like you and me, that the National Security Agency here in the United States is data mining all data, whether it be phone calls, emails, or web activity. And once again, when you not only have the representative of the largest social network out there, Facebook, and Eric Schmidt, a man who goes way beyond Google. After all, he had a diplomatic trip to North Korea just this year. You're obviously going to be in discussions on how not only to mine that data, but how to store that data and how you can use it to profile not only individuals, but communities, states, and even bigger. I mean, this really is about more than just data collection. They are monitoring the activities of people on the whole. So that's why it's so important, again, to talk about this, because once again, when you have no accountability and you basically are living in a national security state, which we are, and people are meeting behind closed doors with these executives, we deserve to know what's going on, especially when there has been pretty much denial across the boards that they were giving this information. But for one, we know that Schmidt a few years back said, hey, if you're doing something on the internet you shouldn't be doing, maybe you shouldn't be doing it. Not, we shouldn't be watching you, listening to you, and taking that data, but don't do it at all.
Right, and it's also just disturbing to know that these top tech leaders are kind of providing this blueprint for the rest of the world. I mean, all these foreign diplomats, leaders, it is disturbing to say the least, Jason. One of the most interesting attendees that I found was Lawrence Lessig, co-founder of Creative Commons, net neutrality advocate, proponent of Aaron Swartz's work. Why do you think a transparency advocate was invited to one of the most secretive policy summits of the year?
Well, I think it has to do with his base knowledge in technology, the fact that he is a pretty big head over at TED Talks. And like you said, it is very interesting. You know, he has written books railing against the United States and its policies within Congress and basically how money runs our government, and that is the truth. So I think on one end, they wanted to get an inside look into somebody's mind that basically profiteers off dissent, and I like that personally. But also to possibly compromise this person, to say, look, we like what you do, maybe we can work on some of these issues, but these issues are a little bit too taboo, we're not going to be able to help with those. We'd like you to help by basically promoting the idea that Bilderberg isn't a consortium of global elitists meeting to plan out the world.
And unfortunately, all we're left is speculation, Jason, because of how secretive it is, because of the lack of transparency. But, luckily we've seen the amount of protesters exponentially increase. This year, I mean, it looked like thousands of people were out there. You have British Member of Parliament Michael Meacher, who was there. With this increase in pressure from activists, journalists, even politicians, do you think that we'll finally start seeing some answers from people who are attending?
Well, I think you're already starting to see that. You've seen some members actually come out and complain that there isn't a lot of transparency within the Bilderberg group. And when somebody like Meacher gets up before, like you said, thousands of protesters that are outside of this hotel and demands transparency and is writing to Parliament and wants accountability from somebody like David Cameron, I would say that, in a way, us activists are winning. Once again, we went from a conference that didn't exist, that only crazy people talked about, to now it being established as something that does matter, that does have the upper echelons of power meeting and is being challenged by members of parliamentary government. I would say that's a huge step for us.
And I think lastly, Jason, now that a lot of Bilderberg attendees are also on the board of think tanks, Council on Foreign Relations, trilateral commissions, why do you think that there's not more kind of light shined on these other think tanks? And I mean, really, what's the difference?
Well, when you look at something like the Council on Foreign Relations, for instance, you're talking about 3,000 plus members. When you're looking at the Trilateral Commission, you have spokespeople, you have meetings in the open, you have a press center where press is actually allowed to go and not just contact and media contact, for basically no information, as Charlie Skelton tried to do for the London Guardian during this conference. So I think the major difference is the fact that you have 20 or so people that attend every year, and then they're scouting out other big players in the world of finance, intelligence, and beyond. People like Timothy Geithner, people like David Petraeus, people like Robert Zoellick. So they may not be there next year, but obviously they're integral into some type of a geopolitical plan this year, some type of a positioning. So the big difference to me is the size of the organization and the lack of transparency.